On a Tuesday afternoon, as a summer storm gathered its breath over the Low Country, a ghost was about to awaken in the grand, silent halls of the Trenholm estate. It was a ghost that had been hiding in plain sight, a beautiful, tragic secret that had been bought and paid for, framed in gold, and hung on a wall for the entire world to see, but for no one to truly recognize. What happens when a humble, invisible gardener sees the face of his long-lost, presumed dead wife in a priceless painting hanging in his millionaire boss's foyer? And what secrets has that painting been holding for 20 long, silent years? Before we begin this incredible story of lost love, a hidden mystery, and a truth that will change everything, do us a favor and like this video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your support helps us bring more of these powerful stories to life. Michael Trenholm was a man who collected things. He collected companies, he collected properties, and he collected art. His life was a carefully curated gallery of success. But behind the designer suits and the perfectly polished veneer, he was a man who was deeply and profoundly alone. The storm broke then, the rain coming down in hard, unforgiving sheets, lashing against the tall, imposing windows of the estate. It was in that moment that the side door opened, and Jackson Bell, the estate's quiet and almost completely invisible black gardener, stepped inside. Soaked from the sudden downpour, his simple work clothes dripping water onto the pristine, marble floor. Jackson had worked at the estate for 3 years. He was punctual, he was quiet, he was a ghost in their machine. He was exactly the way that wealthy households, like the Trenholms, expect their staff to be. But tonight, that was about to change. As he stood there, waiting to be either acknowledged, or, more likely, dismissed, his eyes, the eyes of a man who had seen too much of the world's quiet and very real sorrows, drifted up to the massive and very famous oil painting that hung in the place of honor just above the grand stone fireplace. And in that moment, his entire world, a world that had been built on a foundation of a deep and very private grief, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. His chest heaved as if a great heavy weight that he had been carrying for 20 long lonely years had just been torn open inside him. The words, a raw, ragged, and utterly unbelievable sound, ripped through the silent, cavernous foyer like a clap of thunder cracking through porcelain. Michael Trenholm spun around, his own face a mask of a startled and very annoyed confusion. Jackson took 2 trembling, unsteady steps forward. He didn't look at Michael. He couldn't. His entire being, his entire universe was now focused on the woman in the painting. Michael scoffed, a short, ugly, and very dismissive sound, as he began to walk towards the fireplace. "That," he said, his voice full of a cold, condescending certainty, "is Sophia Ashcroft, a famous portrait of a Haitian French muse, painted by the celebrated artist, René Morisseau. The original was auctioned at Christie's for $2.3 million. It is a masterpiece." Michael stared at him, caught now in a strange, unsettling space between an outraged disbelief and a new, and very unwelcome, uncertainty. And yet, something in Jackson's voice, in the raw, undeniable, and very real pain of it, in the way his own, work-hardened hand trembled as he pointed up at her beautiful, tragic face, was beginning to crack open the very air in the room. Suddenly, the painting on his wall was no longer just expensive. It was personal. It was too personal. For a long, tense, and very heavy moment, neither man moved. The rain outside whispered a sad, lonely rhythm against the tall, imposing windows of the Charleston estate, but inside, it was suffocatingly and terrifyingly still. Michael's jaw tightened. He was a man used to a world of facts, of figures, of proven authenticity. And this quiet, unassuming gardener, a man who had been a ghost in his life for 3 long years, was now standing before him, claiming the impossible. Jackson stepped forward slowly, his own movements now full of a quiet and very painful reverence, as if he were approaching not just a painting, but a memory with sharp and very real teeth. Michael's breath caught in his throat, because no, of course, he hadn't. He had only cared that she was beautiful, that she was valuable, and that she looked magnificent hanging on his wall. Michael opened his laptop and, with a new and very real sense of a dawning, professional dread, he typed in the artist's name, René Morisseau. The search brought up the familiar, expected results: a celebrated 20th century poet, an eccentric genius, a man who was famous for preferring to paint anonymous, unknown muses he found on his travels. But then, as Michael scrolled deeper, past the glossy high-resolution images of his most famous works, he saw it, a decades-old article, buried deep in an obscure, online art forum archive. The headline read, "The Last Muse of Atlanta, who was René Morisseau's mystery woman." The article showed a blurred black-and-white photograph. It was the woman from his painting. The same tilted head, the same sad, beautiful eyes. She was standing, barefoot and in a simple, cotton dress, beside the artist's large easel. The caption below the photo read, "The model, known to the artist's inner circle only by the initials DM, disappeared from Atlanta shortly after the final sitting. She was never publicly identified. DM Delilah Morbell. Michael's stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. He remembered Jackson's words from that afternoon. "We were married." She vanished. A voice, a quiet and very real voice, startled him. "Sir." It was Alina, the new young housekeeper, peeking into the study. "Is everything all right, sir?" He stared back at the woman in the painting, her beautiful, enigmatic face now a silent and very powerful accusation. Suddenly, she was no longer just a muse. She was someone's wife. She was someone's grief. And she was, perhaps, someone's very dark and very unfinished story. Jackson arrived before the sun had fully risen, the rich, dark soil of the estate still under his fingernails from the previous day's storm cleanup. But this morning, he was not holding his usual gardening tools. He was clutching a single, worn, and very old, leather envelope. Michael was already waiting for him in the garden gazebo, a place of quiet, green beauty he hadn't truly seen or appreciated in years. Jackson sat down slowly, his own movements heavy with the weight of a 20-year-old grief. His hands, which were usually so strong and so steady, trembled slightly as he opened the old leather envelope. Inside were photographs, faded and worn, but still intact. He laid them out, one by one, on the cool, glass surface of the table. A younger Delilah smiling, her eyes full of a brilliant, artistic light, holding a newborn baby in her arms. Another one showed her, laughing, as she painted in the sun-drenched backyard of a modest but very happy-looking home in Atlanta. Michael picked up a photograph of Delilah wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, the same faint, almost invisible scar on her chin, the same sad, beautiful, and very haunted eyes. "I filed police reports," Jackson continued, his voice now a hollow, empty sound. "I hired a private investigator. But there was nothing, no trace. It was as if she had just vanished from the face of the earth. And then, 5 long, empty years later, I saw her face on the cover of a magazine. Modern Collector, painted like she was never a real person at all. I tried calling the gallery that was listed. They just laughed at me." Michael leaned back, stunned into a new and very profound silence. Everything he owned, his entire, carefully curated collection of beautiful and very expensive things, was all built on a foundation of another man's profound and very real loss. And that man, that very same man, had been silently and invisibly trimming his hedges for the past 3 years. Michael couldn't sleep. By noon the next day, he had canceled all of his meetings, turned off his phone, and had retreated to the long-forgotten west wing of his own house. It was the oldest part of the estate, a place where few people, especially not the staff, ever went. He pushed open the heavy, creaking door to his private and very secret studio. This was where he kept the others. Over the long, lonely years since he had first acquired the painting, he had hired dozens of different painters to try and recreate her, from his own memory, from his dreams, from his obsession. He had told himself that it was about preserving a certain kind of beauty, about capturing an aesthetic. But now, standing in the middle of this room, a room that felt more like a shrine than a studio, he knew, with a new, and very painful, clarity, that it had been a lie. It had been a theft. He ran his hand over one of the dusty, forgotten frames. It was one of the earliest commissions he had ever made, a simple, haunting close-up of her eyes. They were haunted, they were alive, and they were, he now realized, pleading. "Sir," a quiet, and very real voice startled him. Jackson was standing in the doorway, a silent and very observant shadow. Michael looked around the room, at the dozens of different, and yet somehow identical faces of the woman who had been this man's wife, and he was suddenly and profoundly ashamed. Michael took the book from her. It was dusty, the cover frayed with age. Inside was a faded, leather-bound journal. There were sketches, there were paint formulas, and then there were the entries. He turned a page, and he froze. Page after page described her favorite music, the way she would hum to herself while she was sitting so still, the way she would sometimes cry when a particular pose, a particular memory, became too much to bear. But then, the final, chilling entry. Michael's mouth went dry. She hadn't vanished. She had escaped. And someone, perhaps even Jackson, the grieving, heartbroken husband, had not been the man he had so convincingly and so tragically pretended to be. In that moment, he suddenly didn't know who or what to believe anymore. Jackson stood beneath the ancient, sprawling oak tree, the very tree that had once marked the original boundary of the Trenholm estate. The soil here, he had always known, was different. It was darker, looser. He knelt slowly, his own hands, now bare, pushing away a thick, camouflaged tarp that had been covered with leaves and dirt. Beneath it was a weathered metal box. Inside were the last, tangible remnants of his life with Delilah. Yellowed newspaper clippings of her first small art shows, a single dried corsage from a long-forgotten dance, and their original and now very fragile. Marriage certificate. Michael approached him cautiously. Jackson nodded, his own expression now a mask of a deep and very old pain. 20 years ago, he said, I came here, to Charleston, looking for her. I ended up working here, at this very estate, by some strange, cruel twist of fate. And I stayed. I stayed because I couldn't leave. I thought, I hoped, that maybe, just maybe, she would one day show up. Or maybe, he added, his voice a low and very sad whisper, that God had brought me here for a reason. Michael reached into the box and picked up one of the old, yellowed newspaper clippings. The headline read, Missing Woman, Local Artist Vanishes Without a Trace. Another one read, French Painter Leaves the Country After Allegations of Coercion and Abuse. Michael's pulse pounded in his ears. He looked back toward the grand, silent house, toward the beautiful, priceless painting. So she had escaped him, and she had never, ever come home. Jackson's own voice cracked with the weight of 20 long and very lonely years. I think, he said, that she just didn't know how to. Michael exhaled a deep, ragged breath, the grief and the guilt sinking into him like a stone. That evening, Michael did something he never in his life imagined he would do. He took the painting down from his wall. Carefully, reverently, he laid it flat across his massive, polished dining room table. For the first time in all the long, lonely years he has owned it. He did not see it as a financial asset. He saw it as evidence. A trapped soul. A woman that neither he, nor the man who had loved her, had ever truly known. Jackson stood across from him, a silent and very supportive presence. Michael turned the heavy, ornate frame over. And there, along the back edge of the canvas, almost completely hidden beneath the dark, heavy wood of the frame, were a series of faint, almost invisible, pencil marks. He traced the delicate, elegant inscription with his own finger. The room felt colder now. As if the truth, the final, sad, and very beautiful truth, had finally, and with a great, weary sigh, spoken. Michael looked at Jackson. You deserve to have this, he said. It's not mine anymore. But Jackson shook his head. I don't need the painting, he said. I just ... I needed the truth. And now, he finished, his own eyes now full of a quiet and very final peace. I have it. Michael sat down, his hands trembling. I have built a life on the silence of others, he said. This house, this art, all of it. But I never once asked what any of it cost. Weeks later, the Trenholm estate looked different. The foyer walls, which were once adorned with cold, faceless art, now held real, and very beautiful, stories. Jackson has agreed to help Michael curate a new, and very special, exhibit. It is not for profit, it is for the truth. They have called it the Muse. Who vanished? Delilah's painting hangs at the very center of the exhibit, but it is no longer roped off with velvet ropes or dramatic golden uplighting. A simple, elegant plaque beneath it now reads, Delilah Morbell, artist, wife, survivor, never forgotten. Visitors came, quiet, curious, and then, very moved. Michael gave interviews, not about art, but about silence, about how his own wealth had blinded him, about how his obsession had made him a thief of someone else's memory. I bought a painting, he once said on camera, but I never bothered to ask who I was really buying. Jackson stood near the entrance on most days, dressed in clean slacks and a pressed shirt. Some guests mistook him for a docent, others recognized the deep, quiet grief in his eyes. One afternoon, a woman brought her young daughter to the exhibit. She looks like someone in our family, she whispered, pointing to a smaller, newly discovered painting of Delilah's. Jackson smiled gently. Maybe, he said, she's in all of our families now. And just like that, Delilah was no longer missing. She was seen. Months later, beneath the same ancient oak tree where the truth had first been unearthed, they placed a new, simple, and very beautiful headstone. It read, Delilah Morbell, beloved wife, brilliant artist, a voice that refused to stay silent. Jackson knelt, placing a single, bright sunflower, the kind she used to paint. At its base, Michael stood beside him, a silent and very respectful presence. There was no camera crew, no press, just two men, mourning the same, beautiful woman, from two very different, and now forever connected lives. As the gentle, southern winds stirred through the leaves of the ancient, wise trees, Jackson whispered, thank you, for finally seeing her. Michael didn't reply, but the silent, and very real, tears in his own eyes said everything. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button to honor all the real-life Delilahs who so often go unheard. Comment, I see her now, if you stayed until the very end. And please, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that uncover the truth, the love, and the justice. One single, and very beautiful, scene at a time. Because some paintings, and some people, hang in silence, until someone is finally brave enough to speak their name.